Hi there, Chris here with another fresh tip for you all. In this video, we are going to take a look and talk essentially just about varnishes and whether or not you should varnish or not, really. Here I have just a small selection of varnishes, common being Citadel, Art Coat, and Storm Shield, both a Art Coat being a gloss and Storm Shield being a matte. And of course, companies like Vallejo offer, gloss, matte, and of course satin. Satin being an in-between. It has, a slight gloss to it, but it's not all the way glossy like gloss varnish will give you a nice shiny coat, as opposed to matte, which will give you a very dull varnish. And the question being whether or not to varnish. And I've been seeing some talk around the interwebs lately of gloss being stronger than matte, and in my 30 years of experience I have not seen anything to suggest that gloss varnishes are stronger than matte varnishes. Gloss varnishes just have a tendency to be just a little bit more useful. Personally, I gloss a lot of my models, but for some instances where I want a particular effect to be read properly, I go with a matte, or I will go with a combination, in which I will talk about in a moment. Of course, when talking about varnishes and using these things, it doesn't always have to be at the end phase of your painting session. Sometimes using a gloss coat like Art Coat or even a gloss varnish, they're basically the same thing. They're just essentially a medium that you can finish off a paint job, but you can also use these in between painting phases. For example, when doing pin washing or applying transfers, you definitely will have more success using gloss varnishing at those phases to get a better adherence of transfers, or to get more surface tension out of washes and pin washes, or if you're doing oil washes or anything like that, or even if you are protecting between layers. Also, you will notice in a lot of my videos, you will notice that I use gloss varnishing a lot, especially when using metallics. Under a gloss varnish, tend to show the most lustrous finish for metallic paint, as opposed to using a matte. A matte varnish on top of a metallic will dull it down quite a bit. So if you really like your metallic paints and have a nice shiny metallic finish, using a gloss coat on top of it, or Art Coat, whichever it is. Art Coat is a gloss, so just so that we know we're talking about the same thing here. You use that on at the end phase, but of course these are not solely to be used at the end phase. They can be used as in-betweens. And of course, using a gloss coat to protect between layers of paint as well. So if you're going for weathering, or you're doing any kind of color filtering, you're applying like a metallic and then you want to change the value to like a red or blue, whatever color, and you use a clear coat, oftentimes the tendency is to use a gloss coat between those. You can use just the paint on top of each other, but oftentimes using that gloss varnish between the two will protect that underpainting, so that if you're using any other techniques where you're using, say for example, a brush, a coarse brush to pull the paint layer off, you'll definitely want a varnish under there. Gloss coating often is better. It gets used a lot more often, and like I said with the example of metallics, you just really want to protect that shine. And of course, when you gloss coat, you often have the option to dull it down again, but I find in my experience that if I apply a matte coat, or a matte varnish, and then try to gloss it up, it's not the same. Especially, you notice these things especially on metallics. Metallics, it's if you put a gloss coat on top and then, I want that shiny, and you put a matte coat and then you want it to be shiny and you put a gloss coat on top, I find that it just isn't the same, as opposed to just working straight through a gloss varnish the entire way. And then you can always have the choice afterwards to apply like a satin varnish. If it's just too shiny for you, you can always just knock a bit of that shine out of it. When talking about matting varnishes as well, Lamian medium also is a really great way to knock shine out of the paint as well. And of course, these can also be mixed in with the paint if you want to thin but retain some glossy quality, because for whatever reason you might want to be doing that, you can. These are all water soluble, at least from these paint lines. And of course, these are not the only paint lines. I also will demonstrate in videos using other companies' matte mediums and gloss mediums. And of course, in a lot of the videos you will see, I will use something like Pledge. Oh, geez, it doesn't even fit in the screen here. But I will often use like Pledge to get my gloss coat to happen on a model, especially if it's between. Just because I use a lot of it, especially going through the airbrush, I will use something like Pledge, which is basically an acrylic gloss, and it gets me that shine that I'm looking for. So let's have a couple looks at examples of using these paints. Now, again, with varnishes, if you are gaming with your models and you're playing with them, I highly recommend varnishing your models, be it matte, satin, or gloss. Either way, protect that paint job, especially if you spent a bit of time on your paint job. Again, if you're playing with Warhammer 40,000 and you're applying transfers and things like that, getting used to using gloss varnishes makes your life a lot easier when using the transfers, because then you can finish it off with a varnish, and then of course if it's too shiny you can always dull it down. You can see here this model has a bit of a shine to it because I think I pretty much used a layer of gloss varnish on top of it just to protect it and what have you. But otherwise, if you're going to be handling the model lots, this is definitely a way to go. Now, if you're painting towards display type standards, gloss varnishes are not 100% necessary, especially because the model's not going to be handled a lot. But in this instance, I like to use matte, for example, for fur and flesh textures and things of that nature, because again, it knocks the shine off that surface versus having like the base. You could see how the base has a lot of shine because that's a very glossy varnish that was applied on top of it. It's a combination of things going on there, but that essentially is the difference between the two. And I like the visual contrast between using mattes and glosses and even semi-gloss on a surface to get the overall effect to happen. But most times when painting towards display type standards, usually it's a matte surface, because again, when painting towards a display standard, you are often photographing the model, and often the model will be judged under many lights, and you really don't want all those lights bouncing off that surface. You can see how like the base, how like I've got like 3 lights going on here, and there is a whole bunch of play on that surface, and sometimes in the photos it just doesn't read that well. And again, that's oftentimes why display type painting will have even like the base surface will be painted with those highlights in there, versus if it's to be viewed in person, like a gaming piece. And here's a gaming piece that I've done up, and you can see there is a combination of gloss. You can see that the metallic on the helmet and the weapons has a nice shine to them because they have a gloss on them, versus his cloak. You can see it has like no shine. Well, there's a little spot there I missed, but you can see on the cloak there is no shine because again, I wanted that to have a very matte appearance, and so I applied a matte varnish on there. The model has been glossed, varnished first, and then I applied the matte afterwards because it's easier to knock it down than try to bring it back up. And again, that kind of philosophy plays with a lot of miniatures, especially if you are going for good looking models, but you're not too concerned about display type standards or even competition type standards. You're just, you like to have nice pretty models on the tabletop, and who doesn't? And then of course this final example here is of course an example of the two, as well as I have very glossy surfaces like on the sword and his shin guard and armor, the little turquoise, and his shield also has, you can see there's a gloss layer on that as well. But his hair was given a matte, and the cloth around his waist was given a matte, but his body itself was given a layer of a semi-gloss, a satin gloss. So it's slightly shiny, but it's not as shiny as, say, the armor. You see how the armor, the light, like you look on that shin, you can even see the lights from the cameras. There are just, it's just reflecting all that light back at you. And to varnish or not, it really depends on what you want. If you're going for display type standards, then it's not entirely necessary to varnish the model. If the model is going to be handled a lot and it's a gaming piece, but you want to do a nice good paint job on it and you want to protect your paint job, then of course you want to varnish. But again, like I said earlier, using gloss and gloss varnishes between painting layers is also part of the painting process. And so getting used to it's not really a cut and dry type of response that do you varnish or not. It all depends. It's entirely situational. Again, like all aspects of miniature painting and painting in general, it is entirely situational. It is entirely your desired end result. Like all aspects, it's entirely subjective. So hopefully that answers some of you guys' questions out there. I know there's been a lot of talk lately about whether to varnish or not, and if it's a rookie error to varnish a model when it doesn't need to be. It's entirely subjective. Don't get caught up in that kind of way of thinking about things. There are many reasons to varnish. There are many reasons not to varnish, and it is entirely dependent upon what your needs are. If the model's a gaming piece, I highly recommend it, although it's not entirely necessary. But sometimes through the painting process, again, like when we are applying transfers, you definitely want to have that gloss layer in between portions of your paint job. And like I said, it's entirely situational and subjective, and yeah, so there it is for you guys. Whether the varnish or not, hopefully that answers some of your questions and alleviates some of the anxiety surrounding the notion of whether or not you should be varnishing. And of course, people telling you, don't varnish because you're a noob and blah, blah, blah. So don't worry about that. If you need to varnish your models. If you don't need to varnish, then don't worry about it, So it's your models. You spent the money on them. You do with them as you will. Thank you for watching. Leave any comments down below whether or not you guys like to see more of these kinds of videos answering questions and such, and so leave a comment down below. And of course, a huge thank you to all my patrons. Without their support, these videos would not be possible. For considering Patreon support, click the link in the description below and you'll be taken off to a magical website called Patreon, where there are varying tiers of support, and a huge thank you to everybody who does. Without you guys, these videos just would not be possible. Take care of those brushes, and they will take care of you.